Well, we had a little snafu at church this morning. Apparently, the streaming cut out due to an internet connection, and so the my talk wasn't recorded as it normally is. And so Joanne asked me if I would go ahead and record the talk from home. So those of you who were attending online, if you want, will have a chance to hear the rest of the talk. And those of you who were counting on maybe watching the recording will also have a chance to hear it too. So it will be just my talk. You won't have the special music, unfortunately. Ralph was wonderful, as he always is. So I started this morning with a little bit of Christmas humor. It's hard to get presents for those of us who are able to get what we want when we need it. The older we get, it's very difficult to get presents. And so I thought, okay, I've got the perfect present for my husband Dan this year. I got him a world map and I gave him a magnetic dart. And the idea was we were going to put the world map up on the fridge, the refrigerator, and he got to throw the magnetic dart at it. And wherever it landed, that was where we'd go on a 2 week vacation after the holidays. Well, don't get too excited for us. Looks like we'll be spending 2 weeks behind the fridge. Um, Maybe one of our more interesting trips. You never know. But today is the first Sunday of Advent. This Advent ritual marks the anticipation of the celebration of the birth of Christ in a lonely manger and a humble stable. And as you know, in unity, we understand the Bible stories metaphysically. The Christmas story, the birth of the Christ child in a manger, is a metaphor for the birth of the divine consciousness in our human animal consciousness. I like to think of it as an annual remembering of who we really are. We are so much more than our physicality, our thoughts, our beliefs, our various identities, our behaviors and our attitudes, our hopes and our dreams. This is what I would like to explore with you this morning. Each Sunday of Advent proclaims an attribute of our divine nature. And on this first Sunday, we'll be exploring hope and faith. The revealing word, and for those of you who are students in Unity, know that the revealing word is just a dictionary of metaphysical terms that we use in our teachings. So I decided I would look up faith and hope in the revealing word. And the revealing word explains that hope is the expectation of good in the future. It is a quality of our human nature because it is subject to time. The good, and that is a subjective good, what we would call good, happens in the future. Faith, on the other hand, is the certain knowledge that our good is ours right now, despite outward appearances. Faith is a quality of our divine nature because it goes beyond time and space. We're living in a world of two realities. That seems to be what's hinted at here. The reality of our human nature, which I like to call the horizontal plane, where we experience hope, and the reality of our divine nature, which I like to call the vertical plane, where we experience faith. And there's always been a very powerful demonstration of these two realities, and I like to keep it tucked away with me. So I want to share it with you this morning. You may not be able to see it as well since I am sitting down, but if you imagine allowing the horizontal plane to be represented by the horizontal arms, by putting your arms out horizontally. And then, of course, vertical plane is represented by the rest of your body. So if you can imagine, if I'm standing up, holding my arms out horizontally to represent the horizontal plane, our human nature, the rest of my body representing the divine nature, the vertical plane, you'll notice a very, very popular, or recognize a very, very popular and powerful symbol in Christianity. Yeah, my body forms a cross. And we're going to talk this morning about the horizontal nature. We're going to talk about the vertical nature. And then we're going to talk about the nexus of those two planes, the nexus of those two natures, the portal, which interestingly on the human body is right around the heart. So let's begin by talking about the horizontal plane, the human nature reality, I like to call it. This reality is a finite reality where life is experienced as linear in chronos time, chronological time, where we experience a past, a present, and a future. We are born into it, this reality, and we will transition from it. In this reality is where we experience hope, anticipating what we think is good in the future. Our attention in this reality is focused on getting our needs met. We understand our experience in this reality as stories about what happens to us because we see ourselves as separate individuals and we relate to each other through our various self images. I'm standing up here, you're sitting out there. We're separate individuals and we relate to each other through the self identities that our ego constructs to protect us. We have to strive a lot in this horizontal reality, this human nature reality. We work hard to control what happens to us and to those we love. We rely on our ego and inner critic to guide us and to keep us safe. This is the experience and realm of our human animal consciousness. It's a reality of duality. In this human reality, we experience good and bad, right and wrong, love and hate, war and peace, success and failure. As long as we are alive, we cannot escape this consciousness. But there is the birth of the Christ child in a manger, which means that we also inhabit a divine nature reality. This vertical reality is an infinite reality, not bound by chronos time. In this reality, we experience what the Greeks define as kairos time. Kairos time is a qualitative measure of time in moments and is not linear. I like to think of kairos time as being the time I experience when I am in the present moment. Have you ever noticed that when you find yourself fully in the present moment, time seems to disappear or slow down? This divine reality is less tangible. It is fluid and spacious, eternal. Here we are less attached to outcomes. We're in the flow of life, not holding on to or grasping for experiences. Here we sense our oneness with all that is, our interconnectedness with the world we inhabit. It is in this reality that we experience our pure potentiality and where we encounter the unknown and the mystery. Now that we have an idea of the two realities that we inhabit, we're going to focus on that portal, that heart space where the two realities meet, the portal of our integrated nature, where we can exist as both human and divine. We've experienced this portal many, many times, at the birth of a baby, at the death of a loved one, witnessing a total solar eclipse, or seeing your child take his or her first steps. Anytime we experience awe, we are living from this portal. Dr. Keltner, a psychologist at the University of California, Berkeley, explains that awe is the feeling of being in the presence of something that is vast, that transcends our understanding of the world. Experiencing awe comes from what Dr. Keltner has called a perceived vastness, as well as something that challenges us to rethink our previously held ideas. I experienced awe in this way when I did a fire walk. I was in my early 40s, and I had experienced a heightened fear of fire most of my life. Not sure why, but I really had a terrifying, relationship with fire. And when I learned about fire walking, I vowed to experience it in order to diminish the suffering caused by my heightened fear of fire. So I signed up for Tony Robbins' Unleash the Power Within event. Perhaps you've heard of Tony Robbins. On the first night of the event, we did the fire walk. I remember the fear rising strong as I approached the bed of fiery coals. I started to use the techniques and the strategies that we were taught in order to calm myself. And as I used those techniques and those strategies, I did feel a sense of calmness come over me. And I recognized that faith was arising, the certainty that my good is available to me now, despite the enormous challenge I was facing, that lane of fiery coals that I was going to walk across. I took my first steps on the glowing red coals, and I felt no heat, no pain. I remember focusing my attention very deliberately on the soles of my bare feet. And what I felt there astounded me. I felt the smoothest, roundness of stones that I'd ever felt in my life, the coals. And around those coals was a very, very powdery softness, the ashes that surrounded them. And I remembered those feelings were very heightened in the soles of my feet. When I completed the fire walk, I was a little bit skeptical. I thought, okay, something weird happened there because you shouldn't be able to walk on burning coals and not be burned or feel the heat. So I decided I was one of the last ones in line because, of course, I had a lot of fear around fire. So I just kind of circled back to the lane I was in, and I thought, I'm going to reach out my hand to touch those hot coals to just show myself what was going on. But as I put my hand toward those hot coals, I had to take it back because of the extreme heat. As I walked across those burning coals, I experienced something vast that certainly transcended any understanding that I had of the physical world and experience with fire. And I was challenged to rethink some of my perceptions of the world I inhabit. Why is it so important to focus on the two realities we live in, the human reality and the divine reality? We are living with many problems in this world that we cannot solve. And one option for any problem is radical acceptance, concept that was introduced by Dr. Marcia Linehan, professor emeritus of psychology at the Department of Psychology at the University of Washington. And this was in the 1990s, so this is quite a while ago. According to her, radical acceptance is about accepting life on life's terms and not resisting what one cannot or chooses not to change. Radical acceptance is about saying yes to life just as it is, which can be really, really difficult when life is painful. For example, as we reflect on the war in the Middle East, the world sees soldiers dressed for battle and innocents that are imprisoned by Hamas in harm's way. But we know the innocents and the people in those uniforms are also plain, wholesome, regular people just like us. How can these soldiers dressed in uniform, their hands ready to pull the trigger, be the ones who hug their children before leaving with their gun hanging behind their back? Whisper sweet words on their cell phones to their loved ones. Call their mothers to tell them they're safe. Sing songs of faith, say prayers, and dream of a better tomorrow, just like we do. It doesn't add up, and it doesn't make sense unless you remember that we live in two realities. And it is from the nexus or the portal of these two realities that we can practice radical acceptance. We prefer to use our voice to advocate, to create, to build, to contribute, to comfort and to care, to heal and bring people together, the qualities of our divine nature. But to do that, we first need to survive using the qualities of our human nature. And how do we survive these turbulent times of war in the Middle East, of climate change around the world, of political dysfunction in this country and polarization, not only in our country, but all around the world? We remember that we live in two realities and we practice radical acceptance, expanding our consciousness to accept life as it is and not resist it. We remember that while we live as a human in a world that can be full of trouble, we can have hope because we also live as a divine being with access to an infinite reality where we can exercise faith. The prayer for protection that we say at the end of every service was born of hope and of faith in a time of world war. James Dillard Freeman, the author of the Prayer for Protection, recalls the circumstances that led him to pen these most powerful words. Here is a part of his story in his words. When World War II was raging in Europe, we received many letters and phone calls at Silent Unity from people caught in the conflict, But for a long time, we did not have a prayer for protection that we were satisfied with. This is how one came. Silent Unity has always written a special Christmas prayer service just for Silent Unity workers. In 1940, I, meaning Jim, was asked to prepare this service, so I wrote a prayer of protection to go with the Christmas service. What I wrote was a little 4-line verse that may sound somewhat familiar to you. The light of Christ directs me. The love of Christ enfolds me. The power of Christ protects me. The presence of Christ upholds me. That does sound a little familiar, doesn't it? I had hardly finished this Christmas service before Silent Unity came to me again and asked me to write a protection pamphlet that we could send to people. They told me they wanted affirmative prayers for protection on the back page. Among these was the 4th verse from the 23rd Psalm. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. One of the young women who worked at Silent Unity was reading my manuscript as I wrote it. And as she finished it, she came up to me and said, Jim, if I were a woman in England and they were dropping bombs on my roof, or if I were a soldier and someone was pointing a gun at me, I wouldn't want to feel like I was walking through the valley of the shadow of death. Can't you do better than that? And I thought, you want me to do better than the 23rd Psalm? You must be out of your mind. But rolling around in the back of my head was a little prayer I had written in a prayer for protection for the Christmas service. It came rolling up to the front of my head and demanded that I pay attention to it. It enticed me to see what I could make of it. I felt that if this prayer was going to be sent around the world, I needed to change Christ to God. It had been Christ because of Christmas, but God might be acceptable to more people. So the prayer became what we recite today. And I would like to invite you to experience the prayer for protection from the portal of our human and divine natures. I invite you to turn your gaze inward, closing your eyes if you feel comfortable. If not, just allowing your gaze to go to the floor. Take a few very deep cleansing breaths. Just notice how the air inflates your lungs, pushes down on your diaphragm into your belly area. Allow that marvelous exchange, that miraculous exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, and then exhale through your mouth. Take a few more breaths in this fashion. And now that we're fully in the present moment, centered in the portal of our divine and human nature, allow my words to be your words. The light of God surrounds me. The love of God enfolds me. The power of God protects me. And the presence of God watches over me. For wherever I am, God is. And wherever God is, all is well. And so it is. And now I invite you to start the transition from the inner gaze to the outer gaze. And as you feel ready to open your eyes and to rejoin our virtual gathering, you may have noticed that I altered the prayer a little. The reason that I find this version so powerful is because I will admit that sometimes when I say the prayer for protection, I feel like a fraud. Let me give you an example that I remember very clearly. My family and I were headed down to my parents for the holidays, Christmas, and my parents had retired to Tennessee. So we were on, I believe it was probably 75 South going into Kentucky, and we hit a snag, a traffic jam. And we were sitting there for quite a long time, and the kids were restless in the back seat of a car. And I remember thinking, oh my, it just must be the holiday traffic that is causing the trouble. But we crept along slowly, and finally we got to the cause of that congestion. And what we witnessed was a horrific car accident. It seemed like everywhere you looked, there was carnage, there were ambulances, there were fire trucks. And I remember thinking, because of my divine nature and the interconnectedness of all of us, I remember being really impacted by what had happened to these people. And as is my practice, when I'm encountered with that kind of suffering, I recite the prayer for protection for those involved. But I think the shock was so great of what I saw that I kind of got stuck in my human nature, because I found when I got to the end of that prayer, and wherever you are, God is, and all is well, I almost choked on those words, all is well, because everywhere I looked, nothing was well. I was wanting to fix it, and I knew I could do nothing. And so, this affirmation that wherever I am, God is, and the reminder that wherever God is, all is well and powerful, is very, very helpful to me. In our human nature, in our human world, in the horizontal plane, all does not appear to be well. That's a part of this human experience. But when we remember that in our divine nature, in the divine reality that we inhabit, all is well, that is where the comfort comes from. I found this version of the prayer for protection in the introduction to a rune book that I had received with my deck of rune cards that I purchased several decades ago. It's a very odd place to find the prayer for protection, but the prayer for protection is one of the most popular prayers of our time. Not only is it said around the world thanks to silent unity, but did you know that it was also carried to the moon? On the very first flight to the moon on Apollo 11, astronaut Colonel Edwin Buzz Aldrin carried the Unity prayer for protection with him in the pocket of his spacesuit. I invite you to use the prayer for protection when you feel vulnerable and overwhelmed by the events occurring in our human reality. Use it to remind you that you don't have to live in the human reality entirely. We have access to our divine nature 24/7, and we can choose to live at the portal of our two natures in any moment. And from this portal, we can practice radical acceptance, expanding our consciousness to allow us to accept life as it is and not resist it. Let's close in a word of prayer. As we settle into the wholeness of our being, we affirm these blessings for ourselves and for all beings everywhere. May we be filled with faith. May we be a source of hope. May we be aligned in love. And now I invite you to hold your loved ones in your heart. And let's affirm this for them. May they be filled with faith. May they be a source of help, of hope. May they be aligned in love. And now we affirm this for all beings everywhere. May all be filled with faith. May all be a source of hope. May all be aligned in love. And so it is. Amen.